Thanks again for tuning into Moonshine Gaming. Today we're going to be discussing the top 10 rarest and most expensive Sega Dreamcast games. Now we're going to be doing complete in-box North American pricing. So what this means is that the case, instruction manual, insert, and game disc are going to be included in the prices given on this list. Now, as per usual, we have a few parameters we're going to be following for this list. We won't be including any case variants, home brews, collector's editions, or pack-in games on this list. So without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we've got D2. This was a survival horror game that was released in 2000. The game opens with Laura Parton falling asleep on an airplane trip to an undisclosed location. A bit later, she wakes up to discover a group of terrorists have taken over the plane. David, who turns out to be a special agent within the FBI, attempts to stop the terrorist, but is thwarted when a meteorite strikes the plane, sending it crashing into the Canadian wilderness. Go Canada, go! Laura awakens in a small cabin, being cared for by Kimberly, a fellow survivor of the crash. Laura then sets out into the wilderness in order to investigate the possibility of contacting the outside world and seeking out other survivors, only to discover that strange, hideous creatures are lurking in the area, as something is causing the crash survivors to mutate into the very same monsters she must avoid and battle while traveling through the region. The game has a few different kinds of gameplay. The majority of D2 involves exploring the Canadian wilderness from a third-person perspective, while interior locations are encountered in a first-person perspective. While exploring the wilderness, the player encounters random battles, much like those of role-playing games. When fighting monsters, the player cannot move Laura, but only aim her weapons. Defeating these creatures earns Laura experience points, which are used to level Laura up, increasing her health limit. Laura is initially equipped with a submachine gun with unlimited ammo and a hunting rifle, which is used to hunt animals for meat, which she can use to regain health. Despite the game having incredible graphics, sound, and story, D2 boils down to a battle of pros and cons. The game has an excellent interface, a number of innovative gameplay features, and a great variety of mechanics. However, these features don't mesh too well. The game itself is too easy, and the quest is far too short compared to other survival horror games. Still, with an A+ story, uniquely mature visuals, and a glowing soundtrack, D2 is a game to be highly recommended. This game's worth $201. Next up, we've got Marvel vs. Capcom 2. This is a crossover 2D fighting game that was released in 2002. If you're a fan of one-on-one fighters, you'll already know that this game is known for being one of the best fighting games of all time, showing up on almost every single top 10 fighting game list. This game is incredible. MVC2 is one of the most ambitious attempts to contend superheroes against video game characters. There are 55 characters in the game, and every single one is animated beautifully. Controls are tight, and almost everything about this game was done right. The Dreamcast version of this game is the preferred way to play this game on console, with much more fluid controls and smoother graphics compared to the other console versions of this game. The only downside to this game, and it's a very small downside, is that there was no online multiplayer support outside of Japan upon release. This was kind of upsetting because I'm sure many people would have wanted to test their skills online. It was twice as upsetting at the time because the online multiplayer was actually promised prior to release, but was never implemented into the game. It's a really good game, not much else to say about it. This game's worth $217. Next up, we've got Power Stone 2. This is a multiplayer fighting game that was built on the innovative gameplay introduced by its predecessor, Power Stone, and this game came out in 2000. You have to realize that this is unlike most fighting games, more of a platform fighting hybrid. Power Stone 2 does away with all familiar notions that battle can only take place on a 20 by 20 circle. Counters and blocking have been removed, but in its place is the far more realistic reaction that most of us would have if we were being chased by a giant sword. We'd run away. The idea that you have to take cover behind obstacles or just plain dash for your life when confronted with oblivion is a refreshing change of pace. Fighting game purists out there may not appreciate the different mechanics, but take the little time you need to get used to it, and you will begin to appreciate its more intense benefits. There are 4 different game modes, but the biggest star of the game is the 4-player mayhem. A screen full of your friends is more fun than you can fathom. Teamed up in cooperative mode or duking it out in a free-for-all, The action is fast, furious, and almost always a different experience each time throughout. Creating alliances, rivalries, and outright brawls is only as limited as your aggression. Party game extraordinaire Power Stone 2 can keep even the most picky of gamers on the tips of their toes for hours on end. Fans of the original Power Stone will be pleased with the similar, yet definitely enhanced feel of Power Stone 2. Even with only 2 players, it's still a ton of fun. Plus, the game is significantly more balanced than Power Stone 1. It's definitely one of the wildest fighters to come to the Dreamcast. This game's worth $217. Next up, we've got Tech Romancer. This is a 3D fighting arcade game with a mech theme that was released in 2000. The setting of Tech Romancer takes place in a far future of Earth, where advanced technology have made things calm and decent for the citizens of Japan and the rest of the world. However, the peace doesn't last long as an evil alien tyrant named Goldybus invades the planet with its loyal followers and seeks to conquer the world while enslaving the human race with an emotionless iron fist. An unlikely group of heroes band together to fight against the threat of Goldybus with their own unique mecha robots, and all of them won't rest until Goldybus is defeated and the world is safe from imminent danger. There are a few unique elements of the game that differentiate it from the standard Capcom fighter. First off, the fights take place in a 3D space, although movement feels more limited and the backgrounds have the bare minimum of interaction. It's certainly a nice touch though, and by running around the backgrounds in your mech, you can in some stages squash buildings in order to pick up offensive and defensive power-up items, which can be stored and used later. It's a really great single-player mode in a fighting game for the Dreamcast, and when combined with the animation references, make this a must-have for anyone who can sing the theme song to Robotech and Star Blazers. For gamers in general too, the game should offer up hours of fun as a Capcom fighter that stands out from the pack. This game's worth $242. Next up, we've got Mars Matrix. This is a vertically scrolling arcade shooting game that was released in 2001. In the year 2100, millions of people were starving due to massive food shortages and had caused civil wars around the world. Centuries later, however, the world government had sent colonists to Mars, which began to solve these problems. At a nearby farm, the Infinity Chip was discovered and it revealed all technology of the advanced civilization. In the year 2309, a Declaration of Independence had been sent to Earth from Mars. Large armies have been amassed on Mars and a gigantic armada was waiting for an attack from Earth. The Earth government sends out fleets of battleships followed by a special air raid unit called Acid. Acid is equipped with a new fighter ship known as Mosquito, which you, as the player, will control. Their mission is to enter Mars, stop the rebel violence, locate and destroy the rebel leader. Mars Matrix's experience system is one of its more interesting aspects. As you blow things up, you'll find that bronze cubes of varying sizes are left in their wake. These cubes are physical manifestations of experience, and if you pick enough of them up, your ship's basic weapon will power up. Larger enemies will leave more valuable large cubes, and those left by smaller enemies tend to litter the boards, making experience in truth very hard to avoid. This is a good thing though. A positive side effect of experience is that it causes your mosquito meter to refill just a bit more quickly. The shortcomings of Mars Matrix are minor and limited to 2 of the more trivial aspects. While it gets only mediocre marks in graphics and music, Mars Matrix still manages to be a great game by delivering the intensity and raw destructive fury that shooter fans love above all else in a near flawless manner. Definitely worth a play if you're a fan of vertical shooters. This game's worth $250. And now we're going to quickly thank our sponsor for this video. No, we're not. Of course, nobody's sponsoring this tiny channel. But if you do enjoy the video, you can help us out here at Moonshine Gaming by giving this video a like. And if you enjoy content like this, we put out video game related videos every Thursday, and you can consider subscribing and turning notifications on to keep you updated with future videos. Next up, we've got Project Justice. This is a 3D fighting game that was released in 2001. Following the Rival School series first seen on the PlayStation, Project Justice is a 3D fighting game that takes place back in high school. 20 characters are readily selectable, and they range from baseball slugger to gang members, club presidents, and of course, cheerleaders. Many of your favorites from the Rival School series are found here, with new additions, including Momo, the saccharine sweet tennis player, and Eureka, the violin player, and more. The story revolves once again around Justice High School. The events from the previous Rival Schools have passed, and the students are back to their usual high school activities, but something is amiss. Respected students have been seen attacking innocent bystanders, and the new student, Hiro, has some evil plans in his mind. Take a team of students and do what any teenager skilled in the martial arts with unnatural leaping ability would do: an after-school brawl. The game has pretty good graphics with nice 3D backgrounds, and some fun-looking character models really give this game a distinct look. Another thing I like about the game is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. Whether it's serving up flaming volleyballs, powerful flashes of a camera, or getting smacked around by a tennis racket, the attacks only get wackier as they get more powerful. The only downside to this game is its lack of replay value. The game has a bunch of game modes, but neither of them support too much depth. The combo system is quite simple, and the counter timing is also very easy to learn. Regardless, this is a very fun pick up and play fighter worth checking out. This game's worth $300. Next up, we've got Jojo's Bizarre Adventure. This is a fighting game that was released in 1999. Based on the manga's third main story arc, Stardust Crusaders, the game follows a Japanese teenager named Jotaro Kujo, who has developed a supernatural ability known as a stand. Approached by his grandfather, Jotaro learns that this power is the result of the influence of the sworn enemy of the Joestar family, a vampire named Dio Brando. As his mother's life is put in danger, when she starts developing a stand that she can't control, Jotaro and Joseph go on a quest to destroy Dio so they can cure her. This game is based on the famous manga of the same name, and was also a port of the arcade version. Keep in mind, most ported arcade games don't come nearly close to the original arcade versions, but JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is one of the rare cases where the ported version hits close to home. Incredibly, it retains the speed, playability, and the animation of the arcade version, and it controls great. Also, unlike the PlayStation 1 version, the Dreamcast version features both the original and revised versions of the arcade game in their original forms. One of my favorite modes in the game is the story mode, which offers various minigames borrowed from the comic book itself. Some of these include a card game that pits you against characters from the book, and a side-scrolling shooter. If you're into 2D fighters but have begun to grow tired of the countless Street Fighter spin-offs and the bad home conversions, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure offers fine-tuned Capcom quality with a unique storyline and great control. That alone is worth its weight in gold. This one belongs in every fighting game fan's library. This game was also featured on our top 10 rarest and most expensive Sony PlayStation 1 games, and if you want to check that video out, I'll put a card up above now, and I'll also put a link to that video in the description below. This game's worth $338. Next up, we've got Cannon Spike. This is a multi-directional shooter that was released in 2000. The game takes place in the year 20-something, and the economy has crashed, leading to a rise in robot terror. The World Union of Peace decided to organize a team to help take care of these terror robots and the masterminds behind their appearance. What is really unique about this game is that the characters that you get to play as are composed of a bunch of awesome Capcom heroes. Mega Man, Cammy from Street Fighter, Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins, and BB Hood from Darkstalkers are all playable characters. These characters all have distinct movesets and special attacks, making the roster a huge force for increasing the replayability of this game. When you get down to it, this is a top-down shooter. There are no lives in the game, and instead, your character has a health bar that will slowly deplete when hit. There are 10 levels and multiple difficulty settings, which with the character selection adds to the replayability of this game. One of the downsides to the game is that the in-game graphics can feel pretty plain and generic most of the time. Also, the music is mediocre at best, and the character voiceovers can get annoying at times. While the game isn't perfect, the randomness of the level progression and the action-based gameplay keeps the shooter fun and fresh, and even more so when you add a friend into the mix. This game's worth $360. Next up, we've got Illbleed. This is a survival horror game that was released in 2001. Michael Reynolds, a mentally deranged theme park entrepreneur, is offering $100 million to anyone able to make it through his latest horror-themed amusement park alive. Called Illbleed, the park in question is supposedly loaded with all manner of features and attractions designed to literally scare its visitors to death. Enter the Castle Park School Horror Club, a group of sassy high schoolers led by gore enthusiast Aiko Christie. Aiko is an outspoken young woman and the president of the Castle Park Student Council. Cool-headed Aiko is rather dismayed when her fellow club members approach her with the prospect of venturing into Illbleed and sacking the hefty reward. However, when her friends disappear for days after their supposed trek, brave Aiko ventures into Illbleed after them with the hopes of both rescuing her friends and collecting the cash. From a gameplay standpoint, Illbleed is dramatically different from the slew of horror games released in the late 90s and early 2000s. The game puts even less of an emphasis on combat than Resident Evil style games, and instead it focuses more on the process of identifying and neutralizing traps. Traps are everywhere in Illbleed, and they take a variety of forms. Overall, the game puts a large focus on a kind of stop-and-go gameplay. To safely traverse each stage, you'll have to constantly scan your environment, gauge potential hazards, and proceed carefully. More often than not, this leads to some very deliberate pacing. Some sequences can get kind of crowded. This considered, Illbleed's saving grace is definitely its baddie presentation. While the game is graphically pretty bare, its off-the-wall production and gratuitous use of spurting blood sets its B-movie tone perfectly. And it's not only the blood either. Some of the traps you'll trigger are downright goofy and will make you laugh out loud. The game also features a good number of crazed, murderous crash test dummies. It's a little bit crazy to me that Illbleed actually made it to the Dreamcast. Admittedly, the game's mechanics aren't entirely sound. However, the game does have a unique and quirky character and storyline that makes it worth checking out. Maybe only briefly though, as its core play mechanics start to wear on you even after a few hours of gameplay. This game's worth $385. Next up, number 1, Giga Wing 2. This is a vertical scrolling shooter that was released in 2001. Giga Wing 2 is a far more refined game than its predecessor, still far from perfect and no major changes were made, but nearly every aspect of the game was cleaned up. The areas that received the biggest overhauls were the graphics and music. Most everything is now fully rendered in 3D, bringing a welcome impression of depth to the carnage. The battle truly feels like it's taking place high up in the sky, rather than just about 20 feet off the ground. Also, the music has changed to an orchestral score as opposed to the rock/techno soundtrack of the first Giga Wing, which seems to work well for the second installment. Unlike the arcade version of the game, the Dreamcast version added a few different game modes. A score attack mode, 4-player mode, gallery mode, and online ranking features were added. Obviously, the online ranking features are obsolete now, and the online ranking service ended in 2003. In my opinion, it's not among the shooting elite yet, although many do love this franchise, but Giga Wing 2 is at least a big improvement over Giga Wing 1. Reining in the all-out massacre style of play while still retaining one of the most intense shooter experiences around. Definitely worth checking out. This game's worth $428. And that's going to do it for the video. We hope you enjoyed the top 10 rarest and most expensive Sega Dreamcast games. We'll see you next time.